Perfect. That's an amazing and high-performing topic for your finance history niche. Here's how we'll do it. Topic: how debt became the most profitable product in history. Give 7 sessions, each around 400 to 500 words. Give storytelling plus documentary tone. Give same professional, engaging style as your Cold War of Dollars series. Let's start with Session 1. Session 1. The birth of debt. Long before Wall Street skyscrapers and digital banks, the idea of debt was born in something as simple as human trust. Thousands of years ago, in early Mesopotamia, people didn't have coins or paper money. Instead, they traded promises. A farmer might give a sack of grain today and receive a goat later, a deal based entirely on credit. It was a system built on belief that the other person would pay back. As societies grew, these simple promises became written agreements. The first I owe us. Ancient clay tablets recorded who owed what and by when. Over time, this evolved into an entire economic structure. Debt wasn't just a financial tool. It was the glue that held civilizations together. Temples and governments became record keepers, tracking every transaction. But the moment someone realized that debt could be traded, everything changed. In ancient Rome, lenders began to sell their debt claims to others for profit. Suddenly, debt was no longer just a personal agreement. It became a commodity, something that could be bought, sold, and used to make money. This concept revolutionized how people viewed wealth. Owning gold or land was no longer the only sign of power. Now, owning someone else's promise, their debt, could make you richer. Fast forward a few centuries, and this simple concept would evolve into one of the most powerful engines of modern capitalism. The medieval world took this further. Merchants, kings, and entire empires borrowed heavily to fund wars, trade expeditions, and expansion. From the Italian bankers of Florence to the money lenders of England, debt became the lifeblood of progress, but also a weapon of control. If you could lend, you could rule. By the time the Renaissance arrived, debt had already become a tool of global influence. The stage was set for a transformation that would turn debt from a financial instrument into the most profitable product in history, one that would reshape economies, politics, and even morality itself. The story of debt isn't just about money. It's about power, trust, and the price of progress.
By the 17th century, the world had changed, and so had money. Trade routes stretched across oceans, empires ruled continents, and wars were fought not just with armies, but with credit. The modern banking system was born, and with it, debt found its most powerful engine. It began in Europe, particularly in Italy, the Netherlands, and England, where merchant families like the Medici, the Fuggers, and the Rothschilds mastered the art of lending. They discovered a simple but revolutionary truth: money could create more money. All you needed was trust, paper, and time. When kings needed gold to fund wars or voyages, bankers didn't give them real coins. They gave them promises, paper notes backed by deposits, loans, or sometimes by nothing more than reputation. In return, they charged interest, and that interest became their gold mine. Soon, banks realized they didn't need to wait for repayment to profit. They could bundle and sell the debt itself, transferring the right to future payments to others for an immediate gain. Debt had officially become a product, one that could be shaped, traded, and multiplied infinitely. The creation of the Bank of England in 1694 marked a turning point. It wasn't just a place to store wealth, it became a factory of credit. The government could borrow, issue bonds, and use future taxes as collateral, a brilliant move that financed Britain's empire and global dominance. Every soldier, ship, and colony was, in some way, funded by debt. This model spread rapidly. By the 1800s, nations learned to survive and thrived on borrowed money. Debt was no longer shameful. It was a symbol of ambition. Businesses borrowed to expand. Governments borrowed to industrialize, and individuals borrowed to live better lives. But behind this explosion of prosperity, a quiet transformation was taking place. Bankers and investors were no longer selling goods, they were selling promises. Debt itself had become the ultimate commodity. The value of everything, land, labor, even time, could now be measured in credit. From London's financial district to Wall Street's emerging skyline, the age of financial capitalism had begun. It was an era where those who created debt became richer than those who created products. The business of borrowing wasn't just fueling economies, it was defining them. The seed was planted. Debt was no longer a necessity of survival, it had become a machine for profit. And in the coming centuries, that machine would grow so powerful that it would dictate the fate of nations. The 19th century marked the dawn of a new era, the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines roared, railways stretched across continents, and factories transformed cities into the beating hearts of progress. But behind this wave of innovation was a silent force driving it all: debt. For the first time in history, innovation demanded massive capital. Building railroads, factories, and ships wasn't cheap. It required money that few individuals or even governments possessed. So, they turned to banks and investors. Credit became the fuel of invention. Businessmen discovered that they could borrow against the future, taking money today to build something that would pay off tomorrow. And banks, sensing opportunity, began to pour money into industries that promised growth. Every railway track, every steamship, and every factory chimney was built on borrowed funds. Debt was no longer a burden, it was a ticket to the future. The more you borrowed, the faster you could grow. Corporations were born from this philosophy, and with them came the modern stock and bond markets. Shares and loans became ways for ordinary people to invest in extraordinary ventures. The concept of national debt also evolved. Governments realized that borrowing could stimulate progress, building infrastructure, funding armies, and expanding influence. Nations began to compete not just in military strength, but in financial confidence. A country's credit rating became as important as its borders. This was the golden age of lending. Banks became giants, financial districts became empires, and debt, once considered dangerous, became respectable. The saying, "Owe a bank $1,000, it's your problem. Owe it $1 million, it's theirs," captured the new reality. Debt wasn't a weakness anymore, it was leverage. But every boom brings a shadow. With the explosion of credit came the first financial panics. The Panic of 1873, the Great Depression of 1929, these crises were born from too much borrowing, too much speculation, and too much confidence in promises that couldn't be kept. Yet each collapse was followed by an even greater rise. Because debt, for all its risks, had become too profitable to abandon. By the dawn of the 20th century, debt had woven itself into every layer of society, from the industrial magnates of Europe to the working families buying homes on installment plans. Humanity had entered a new age, one where progress, innovation, and even survival were measured in credit. Debt was no longer just a tool of growth. It had become the engine of the modern world, a machine that no one could stop and few truly understood. By the early 20th century, America was booming. Skyscrapers reached the clouds, cars filled the streets, and a new idea began to shape the modern world, the American dream. It promised that anyone with enough hard work could have a home, a car, and a better life. But behind this dream was a quiet enabler: consumer debt. After World War I, the U.S. economy exploded with innovation. Mass production made goods cheaper and more accessible. But there was one problem: people couldn't buy everything they wanted at once. That's when businesses discovered a revolutionary idea: buy now, pay later. Installment plans became the bridge between dreams and reality. Ordinary people could now afford furniture, radios, cars, and later, homes, all without having the full amount up front. Companies realized they could sell more products not by lowering prices, but by extending credit. And the real profit wasn't just in selling goods, it was in collecting interest. Banks followed quickly, offering personal loans, mortgages, and new financial products aimed at the rising middle class. The promise of the American dream was no longer built on savings, it was built on borrowing. Then came a small piece of plastic that changed everything: the credit card. First introduced in the 1950s, it turned the concept of debt into convenience. No more waiting, no more saving, just swipe, and your future self would pay for it. Within decades, credit cards became symbols of status and freedom, but also chains of invisible debt. Advertising magnified this culture. Television and billboards didn't just sell products, they sold lifestyles. They told people they deserved better cars, bigger homes, and newer gadgets, even if it meant going deeper into debt. And America listened. By the 1970s, personal debt had become a normal part of life. Home loans, car loans, student loans. Debt was no longer a last resort. It was a financial strategy. Banks and corporations earned billions in interest, fees, and credit charges. Debt had evolved from a necessity into the most profitable product ever invented. But this new system had an unseen cost. As people borrowed more, they became dependent, not just on money, but on the institutions that controlled it. The American dream was built on freedom, yet millions now owed their future to banks. Debt had quietly transformed from a bridge to success into a trap of comfort, one that would soon shake the foundations of the global economy. By the late 20th century, debt had outgrown individuals and nations, it had become global. What began as personal borrowing and national bonds now connected every corner of the world in an invisible web of credit, loans, and financial promises. The globalization of debt had begun, and with it, a new era of economic power. The key players weren't kings or conquerors anymore. They were banks, corporations, and international institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and global investment houses. These entities realized something monumental. Debt could control nations just as effectively as armies once did. After World War II, the United States led the creation of the Bretton Woods system, establishing the dollar as the backbone of world trade. Other countries pegged their currencies to it, creating a structure where the U.S. could essentially lend the world its own money. This system gave America immense influence and made the dollar debt the most powerful economic weapon ever created. As developing countries sought to modernize in the 1960s and 70s, they borrowed heavily from Western banks. New roads, factories, and power plants were built, but they came at a price. Interest rates rose, and soon many nations couldn't repay what they owed. This triggered the debt crisis of the 1980s, when countries from Latin America to Africa found themselves trapped in loans they could never escape. Behind the scenes, debt had turned into a tool of global influence. Nations that couldn't pay were forced to follow strict economic policies designed by lenders, a new form of control that didn't require colonization, only contracts. Meanwhile, in the private sector, financial innovation exploded. Banks discovered the art of securitization, turning bundles of loans like mortgages or credit card debts into tradable financial assets. This meant debt could now be sliced, packaged, and sold to investors around the world. Profit didn't come from lending itself anymore, it came from trading debt like a commodity. Wall Street became the empire's capital. Every loan, every bond, every credit agreement became part of a global marketplace of promises. Money no longer needed to exist physically. It flowed through computer screens, numbers, and trust. By the 1990s, the world had entered an age where everything ran on credit. Governments borrowed to fund growth, corporations borrowed to buy competitors, and consumers borrowed to sustain lifestyles. Debt wasn't just a tool of finance anymore. It had become the foundation of the global economy. The world had learned to thrive on borrowed time and borrowed money. But beneath the surface, the system was becoming dangerously fragile. The next chapter would show what happens when too much debt collides with too little reality. By the early 2000s, the world was addicted to debt. Banks were lending more than ever, governments encouraged home ownership through easy credit, and investors believed the system was invincible. Debt wasn't just a product anymore. It was the engine of global growth. But like any engine pushed beyond its limits, it was destined to explode. In the heart of Wall Street, financial institutions discovered a dangerous kind of genius. They could create profit from risk itself. They bundled thousands of home loans, including risky ones, into financial instruments called mortgage-backed securities. These were sold to investors worldwide as safe, guaranteed sources of income. But behind the glossy numbers lay a ticking time bomb. Millions of borrowers who could barely afford their loans. For years, everything looked perfect. Housing prices soared, people took out bigger mortgages, and banks made billions in fees and interest. Ordinary families believed they were building wealth, but in truth, they were building mountains of debt supported by little more than faith. Then, in 2007, reality hit. As interest rates rose, millions of homeowners couldn't pay their mortgages. The system began to collapse from the bottom up. The loans that had been turned into global investments suddenly became worthless. Banks stopped trusting each other. Credit froze. And the very machine that had powered the world economy came crashing down. The 2008 financial crisis was more than just a market crash. It was the moment when debt turned against its creators. Giants like Lehman Brothers collapsed overnight. Trillions of dollars in global wealth vanished. Governments stepped in, printing money and taking on enormous new debts to rescue the same system that had failed. But here's the irony. Instead of killing the business of debt, the crash made it even stronger. Central banks cut interest rates to near zero, making borrowing cheaper than ever. Corporations borrowed billions to buy back their own stock. Governments borrowed to stimulate economies. Debt became the cure for the very disease it had caused. The crisis revealed a profound truth. Modern economies can't survive without debt. It's no longer just a product. It's the oxygen of capitalism. Every recovery, every boom, every market rally since 2008 has been fueled by borrowed money. Yet deep down, the same danger remains. When profit depends on debt, stability becomes an illusion. The world rebuilt itself after 2008, but on the same fragile foundation, one made of promises that can only last as long as confidence does.
The 21st century has entered a new era, one where debt has no limits. What once began as a simple agreement between the people has evolved into a vast digital system controlling nations, corporations, and individuals alike. We now live in the age of infinite debt, where money is created not by gold or goods, but by promises. After the 2008 crash, central banks tried to save the global economy with a new experiment, quantitative easing. In simple terms, they printed trillions of dollars to buy government bonds, corporate debt, and financial assets. This artificial flood of money kept markets alive and made borrowing cheaper than ever before. It worked, but it also rewired the world. Debt became the new normal. Governments borrowed endlessly to keep economies running. Corporations borrowed to expand and inflate their stock prices. Consumers borrowed to keep living the lifestyle they couldn't afford. The result? Global debt soared to over $300 trillion, more than 3 times the world's total economic output. But here's the strange part. No one seemed to care anymore. Interest rates were near zero, inflation was controlled, and credit was abundant. Economists called it modern monetary theory, the idea that governments could create as much money as they needed, as long as confidence remained. It was a financial illusion built entirely on trust. Digital technology took this even further. Today, most money doesn't exist in physical form. It's just numbers on screens, created by keystrokes, traded by algorithms, and controlled by institutions that the average person barely understands. The future of debt is even more abstract. From cryptocurrencies to central bank digital currencies (CBDCs), we are moving toward a world where debt and data are inseparable. And yet, the core truth remains the same as it was in ancient Mesopotamia. Debt is power. Those who issue it control it. Those who depend on it obey it. The difference is that now, we all depend on it. Entire civilizations, markets, and lives built on borrowed time. The irony of human progress is clear. We've used debt to conquer poverty, build empires, and explore space. But we've also chained ourselves to it. The more we borrow, the more we must keep the system alive. In this new world, debt is no longer a problem to be solved. It's the heartbeat of modern civilization. The real question isn't how much we owe, but how long this illusion can last before it demands to be paid. Because one day, history may look back and call our time not the digital age, Not the information age, but the age of debt.